We're about to dive deep into the art of storytelling and podcasting. I want your listeners of your podcast to be so drawn in, so enthralled by the words and the visuals and the connection that they are getting from you that they cannot stop listening. The art of storytelling is so powerful because it's going to drive more subscribers, more recurring listeners, and most importantly, more conversion right from your show. So grab a notebook and pen. Let's get into it. Are you ready to grow your online business, make consistent income, start a successful podcast? Welcome to Online Business for Christian Women with Stephanie Gass. It's time to grow, girl. So this morning, I was hanging out with my boys. They are off for the summer, and this week we have no VBS, no camps, no trips, and it's been a little bit of a doozy trying to still get my work done with my kids at home. But I knew that if I strategically set out a structured plan for them for the day, that I was going to be able to find these priceless pockets of time to still record my podcast episode, to create content, to do a coaching call or whatever it might be, to lead my team, the things that I still needed to do. So what we did is I actually got out a sheet of paper and I had my little guy map out the hours of the day. And then I had them start with what they really wanted to do today. And of course, what do they say? We want to do tech. Of course they do. So I strategically chose the hour of tech time, which is basically learning apps and approved technology for them, on the hour in which I'm recording this content for you. So that went into the schedule. The next thing that we did is we plugged in the meal times because those are standard. And then what we were able to do is play with the other time blocks in their day. So we did a 30-minute puzzle block. We did a 30-minute outside playing sports block. We did a brain quest block, which is basically like this learning book that they do, a reading block, etc. So by the time we were done planning their day, I was able to find about 3 to 4 hours-ish of work time just from being able to plan ahead. And funny enough, as I share this story with you, I realize like God is so faithful. Our devotional that I did with the kids this morning was from Proverbs 16:3, I think it was, which was submit your actions to the Lord and then your plans will succeed. Imagine that. So submitting my actions by sitting with the kids, planning, taking that time to really get the day super structured before just diving straight in and then having things be chaotic. Not only was that scriptural from this morning, but it was also really actionable. And so guess what I just did? I just shared a story with you. And if I was really smart, what I would do next is tell you that I had a podcast episode all about planning, about taking the time to set up and structure either your day, your week, your productivity, or your podcast up in such a way. Now, that's not what today's episode is about, but why I shared that with you is because I wanted to draw you in and give you a visual example and an audible example of storytelling in a podcast. Isn't that crazy? So there's a few things that I want you to recognize about that story I just shared. The first thing is that the story I shared is something that is relatable to the content that I would want to teach. So if I was going to share that story, I would then really be teaching something that I could transition that story into around like planning or preparedness or working your business with kids, something that had to do with that story. So you really want to think about the relatability with the story that you choose to share. I also think that it's critically important the positioning of your story. Most of the time, I like to position my storytelling in my show at the front end of the podcast. And the reason is that it's such an attention getter. It's such a connector, right? It's got that vulnerability in there. And I'm going to go through some elements of a good story in a minute, but that front end positioning is really what locks in your person's attention. And it helps them to be more excited to learn from you. And I think it also just really kind of breaks down any vulnerability barriers that you need to break down. And then the other piece here that I think is important is I didn't drag the story on and on and on. Let your stories be 2 minutes or less. All that said, let's go through some tangible, tactical pieces for you. So my note takers out there, I want you to go ahead and step into this note-taking tactical space with me, because this is going to really solidify storytelling for you so that it becomes not just something where like, oh yeah, I should tell a story, but like actually ingrained inside the strategy of your weekly podcast. So first, let's just begin with what is storytelling? It's exactly what I did in the example. I'm such a visual learner, and so I always try to show you guys what I'm teaching you. And it's basically taking an experience that you or someone you know has had, whether it be long, long ago or recently, and you're basically recapping that story, that experience, and you're sharing it with your audience. It's just a connection point. You're telling a story, okay? It's something historical. Now, the components of a good story, as with any book that you read, any podcast that you record, any movie that you've ever watched, there are a few really great components of a story. First are characters in your story. So from my example, it was me and my 2 boys. Then we have plot. What is something compelling, engaging? What's the narrative, basically? There's a setting. So in my example, I said we were sitting here. This is what's happening this summer. The boys are off school. I got out a sheet of paper over the breakfast nook. Like, I created a setting. And the reason setting is important in storytelling is because it almost transports your listener's imagination to where you are during that story. And it creates even more of the belief factor as they listen to you. Conflict is something that's really fun in a story. So I didn't go super hard on the conflict, but I did mention that it's been a struggle to get work done during the summer. And so the conflict was, how do I basically plan so that I have effective work blocks in order to continue doing my work? So there was some mild conflict. So look for when you have a story to share, like what makes that story relatable to your person. It's whatever, like the reason that happened, the fear behind it, the setback. Like I always can ask myself, like, what's something funny that happened this week? What's something embarrassing that happened this month? What's something in my past that I don't want to talk about? Like, those are always going to be really juicy, great stories for you to share on your stuff. The other way that I also work this is I think about the content I want to do first, then I go backwards and ask myself, what story, small or big, might relate to this particular episode. Okay, and the last thing is resolution. So in your story, think about what was the outcome, that was the win. What was the benefit? What was the solution? What was the yay, I did it? Like, any of those are gonna really be a hero end to that small baby story. Now, let's talk about a few techniques for storytelling. The first one is to show, not to tell. So showing is where you're going to use that descriptive language instead of just telling them something. You almost want to paint a picture for them. So if I was to tell a story about this right now, I would say to you, as I sat down to record my weekly podcast episode, I was so frustrated because I constantly find myself forgetting to bring my drinks in. And if you guys know anything about me, I have to have at least 3 drinks at all times on my desk. And so I proceeded to have to go back out to the kitchen to reheat my lukewarm coffee, which then caused my coffee creamer to defluff. And I really do appreciate a nice solid foam on my cup of joe. Okay, so then I had to put the more creamer in there and get out the little frother. And then I had wasted 10 minutes. So then I came back in here to record the episode, and my son needed me to print him a picture, but not just any picture. He needed to have Mario and Luigi, not together, but in separate pictures. So then I had to print him the picture. I mean, you guys, it went on and on and on. Do you see how I'm taking a small, tiny experience and I'm painting a visual picture for you? Like, I needed the cream on the coffee, then my son came in. It wasn't just like, yeah, I sat down to record and I didn't have my drinks, and so then that was super frustrating. Like, more. And now we don't want to go on and on and on. We want to really have, I propose to you keeping that 2-minute barrier on yourself of like, if I'm going to go into a story, like 2 minutes or less. And so another thing that I do, just bonus tip, I tell multiple stories throughout my podcast episodes. If you guys are listening to my show, Online Business for Christian Women, you know that you're hearing lots of those little baby stories kind of embedded and infused throughout the whole episode. That's become natural for me after 6 years of podcasting. But for you, you might just, when you do your podcast outline, put like a brain, like a little reminder for yourself, like share this story or share this experience or share what happened yesterday. Okay, the next thing that you want to think about in your storytelling is building suspense and tension. If you can utilize, now this is getting a little more advanced, so feel free to save this as a next level strategy, but how can your story keep your listener on the edge of their seat? So maybe one way that we could have structured my story as an example for you is in the beginning of the episode, I would have said, I've been so frustrated with trying to get work done while still being so present and intentional with my boys. This summer, my goal was to soak them up, to be present with them, to play some football out in the yard, to play some pickleball, which PS, we have just learned how to play pickleball in our shop outside. And like, I am the all-star, okay? Like, I'm a little too competitive for my own good, all right? But I'm obsessed. But like, I digress. I've still been struggling to get work done. And so we really came to this culmination of like, how am I going to structure my summer days where my kids are off? Those special days that I want to be with them, but I also have some things I have to do in my company to keep getting clients, making income, and leading my team. Well, lean in, because today I'm going to share everything with you of how I created 4 to 5 hours a day to get my work done. Boom. Cliffhanger, right? You're like, what'd she do? So in that example, I used storytelling at the front end of the podcast and didn't give you the solution, making you wait through the intro, through the CTA of the episode, and then I'll pick back up in the story. That would be an example. Okay, the next technique that I want to share with you is your voice and your tone. Did you notice anything about my voice, tone, and intensity as I shared that story with you? I hope so, because I did it on purpose. I tried to ramp up when it got really exciting. Any type of little conflict portion that I mentioned was really going to be more intense. And I also try to remind myself to smile and laugh at appropriate times, because people can actually hear that in your voice. Also, one more pro tip, you don't want to always be super loud and intense, because it will lose its impact on your listener. Have you ever been to a church sermon and maybe the person preaching is a little new or like, I don't know, learning, and the whole time they have the same really loud, it's like literally the same the whole way through as we talk about the Lord, right? Like, I love me that, but I also feel that there are certain times where we want to grab attention from our listener. Even in a small 2-minute story, we still need that inflection and that variety. We don't want to hold the entire time at such a quiet tone or such an intense tone. We really want to kind of ebb and flow based on how the story is being told, okay? Okay, the next technique I want to share with you is about sound. If you want to get a bit more advanced than even some of the other things I've talked about, during your storytelling, you could choose to play some music. So that's another thing. I honestly don't really do that because I don't think it's necessary in a 2-minute story. But I have had podcast episodes before where I'm focused on marketing something like an internship or marketing a huge boot camp we have coming up, and I really want a story to hit and to land. I might put some music behind it. So that's not something you have to do all the time, but it is something that can help your story really be felt. Okay, the next thing we're going to talk about here is how to get your story to matter to your person. Because if we do not tell a story that's really pertinent to the content we're talking about, we've lost them. If we're telling a story and our audience is completely in a different phase of their life, a different phase of their business, a different season in their marriage, whatever it is, again, we're going to probably lose their interest. So we have to, it's not just about telling any old story, it's about being a strategic storyteller. So the first thing to think about is this story relatable to my ideal listener? So for me, when I gave you guys the example, I would say 80% of my audience are moms who work from home, 80%. Or they work out of the house, but they're still moms and they're still trying to grow an online business on the side. So me sharing the story of like, I'm trying to juggle kids, whether your kids are really little or whether your kids are teenagers, we're still juggling kids, right? And trying to grow a business. It was relatable. And also talking about how the summer routine just totally goes out the window, how I want to record a podcast episode, but it's always like a whole thing. Like I got to get my drink and then I got to reheat the coffee and then I need a thing. And then like I forgot this thing and like the lighting. Anyway, like all of that is super relatable to my ideal listener versus if I decided to share a story on how we recently onboarded a new marketing manager and our team has expanded to, 15 plus 8, not great at math, over 20 people. And I'm going to share this whole, like, not relatable. Like most people that are in my audience have one person helping them in their company or no one helping them in their company yet. So I probably wouldn't share a story like that from a relatable perspective. I might share a story like that from a where I'm going and like a future casting type of story. But honestly, I probably wouldn't share that because it's just not relatable. So just be careful of that. The other thing we want to do is focus on interactive storytelling. I think when we think about our audience and keeping them in mind. So, I didn't do this in the example, but this is such a great reminder. Like, how is your summer going for you? Come on into our Facebook group and let us know. What is your top time blocking tip for trying to manage and juggle kids while you're operating your business this summer? Come and share it in the Facebook group. Leave a comment in the podcast review section and let me know. Like getting your listener to interact with you is so powerful because we really are one-sided as we push content. So let's help people to feel really seen, heard, and valued by welcoming them in to reply to you. So that is really the main notes that I have here to share with you about storytelling. And I think if I was to tactically give you some tips and some next steps to implement with, I would say, number one, you have to have a podcast because if you do not have long form content that is, in my opinion, audible, I had my podcast for 6 years before I ever started looking at other long form content avenues, then that's the very first thing you must do. And so to learn more about how podcasting works to get clients and help you make income, go to podcastforgrowth.com. I've got a free workshop over there for you. The second thing you need to do if you have a podcast is to be consistent. Nobody is going to be connecting with you if you're like, whoopsie, forgot for a month to air a new episode. No, your podcast is your top of funnel. I've got so many episodes on that. If you have not bought in, that you have got to be consistent and that podcasting is the method of getting new leads in and even more so conversion, go listen to my podcast, Online Business for Christian Women. And then the last thing you need to do is I want you to practice actively storytelling in every episode. Okay. So when you do your podcasting outline, whether it's just a few little notes on a sticky, which is basically what I typically do, or whether it's like, oh, I need a whole thing drafted out, think about what the relatable story is you're going to share with this episode. And you've got like 5-minute max on that. I do not want you sitting there in analysis paralysis for 2 hours. Like, I can't think of the perfect story. I can't think of the perfect story. Just ask yourself, like, it can be the tiniest story. It can be something itty bitty baby that happened this week. Like I promise there's a way to bridge random stories to concepts as well, right? So just think about micro stories. You don't always have to be a macro storyteller. And sometimes macro works well, and sometimes future casting works well. So just really give yourself that freedom to play with storytelling this week and to make it a really pointed decision to plug that into that outline, okay? And then practice makes perfect. Have fun with it. Practice these tips. Hey, thanks so much for checking out this video. I hope that it helped you, encouraged you, blessed you, and helped you in some way. If so, be sure to subscribe to the channel so that you don't miss any of our videos. be sure to share this video with a friend who might be looking for some encouragement in their business, life, or their faith walk. And lastly, please, please come and check out the podcast where we have so many hundreds of episodes to support you in your growth journey as an online entrepreneur. And that can be found at Online Business for Christian Women. And don't forget about all the ways that we can help you grow for free by checking out the free workshops, freeclarityworkshop.com and podcastforgrowth.com, and the ways that we can work together at stephaniegass.com/school. I will see you again next week. Thanks for being here, and God bless.